Hi, everyone. Thanks, Steve, for being with us. I will start because it's a discussion, and we will continue the discussion we had a few minutes ago during the coffee. I will start with the first question for you. How do you see the US winning the race with China without having a strong alliance or backing from Europe? Because we see today that the relationship gets tougher with trade issues, with security issues. How do you see this story flying? And is it the intent of the US to strengthen the cooperation with Europe towards China? What is the strategy in this race?
Yeah. Fabrice, thank you for having me, and thank you to AIFA for having me. And I understand that I have perhaps a difficult role today as the America First spokesman in a room full of Europeans who are naturally very skeptical of the America First movement or view it with outright antagonism in some cases. So I will try my best to explain what's going on in the United States and what it means for Europe. And to answer your question specifically regarding China, China is a real driver of the America First movement. The rise of populism in the United States can be traced almost exactly to China's entry into the WTO in 2001. Which was, in my view, a bipartisan failure in the United States. Ruling class elites saw a lot of benefits for them and frankly didn't care that China's predatory trade tactics were going to eviscerate American industries and entire regions, for that matter, of the United States. This gave rise, really, to the Tea Party and eventually the MAGA movement, which has now, in a relatively short period of time, become the governing movement of America. So we are no longer fringe, we are no longer minority, we are the majority movement in America. Populist, nationalist right won the popular vote in 2024, which very few observers thought could happen. So to answer your question specifically about China, taking on China, confronting China, and eventually decoupling from China, these are foundational goals of the America First movement. We are far too dependent upon China for sourcing all kinds of critical materials, as is Europe. But in the case of the United States, we have taken a far more aggressive tone under this president. And I can tell you that even the Democrats, what Trump has done successfully is he's essentially moved the center on this issue. So even the Democrats are now trying to appear to be tough on China. Regarding Europe, my suggestion to Europe is that you need to be engaged in some strategic protectionism regarding China. For example, in automobiles right now, if you stick with these mandates about electric vehicles, which I think are frankly folly, they're nonsense. But if you insist on sticking with these electric vehicle mandates, you're going to lose your auto industry largely to China in the coming years. And that is, I think, extremely unfortunate for the European continent. But it also tells us in the United States, I think you have to realize that when we look at Europe right now, we look at Europe with great admiration, right? I mean, we're the daughter of Europe, and we look at our parents with admiration and love, and we inherited Western civilization from Europe. But at the same time, a child can be disappointed in their parents, okay? And we are disappointed right now because we believe that Europe has gone the route of unhealthy multiculturalism and unsustainable mass migration. And I would say those are the two M's that are afflicting Europe. They're problems in the United States, but they're problems that we have decided to take on. And that we're confronting right now. And we have the opposite in terms of migration, right? We now have migration outflow out of the United States, both via self-deportations as well as compulsory arrests and deportations from the United States. We are reclaiming our culture. And when we look at Europe, we wonder if we have a reliable partner. Does Europe share our values any longer? For example, when we look at our mother country of the United Kingdom, which in many ways invented free speech doesn't exist anymore in the UK. Free speech doesn't exist in Germany. These are shocking developments to us, right? It's shocking to us that the home of Western civilization has in many ways abandoned Christianity, abandoned the rights, which we believe are God created and endowed to all people anywhere. So we wonder if we have a reliable partner in terms of confronting China. I hope we do. And I hope this alliance can be solidified again. But in the meantime, what I will say is where most Americans are focused now is not so much on Europe, but on our own hemisphere. And this was made very clear in the National Security Strategy document that the Trump administration just put out, which I know is not popular in European capitals. But we are focused on our hemisphere because what we see in our hemisphere is a neighborhood, effectively, where the populist right is on the rise, particularly in places like Argentina and now Chile. We believe we have a real shot at winning in Colombia and perhaps Peru. And so we see in our hemisphere the potential to both grow business dramatically, grow trade dramatically within our hemisphere, but also with countries and peoples who still believe in Western civilization and who still share our values by and large.
Thanks. It's a very good summary, I think, of America's first and your vision of Europe today. It does not say fully how we could cooperate better towards China, but I think that the recipes that you are using in the US is the one you wish that Europe is using as well, so more protection. So if I bounce back in this conversation, protection might be a good idea in some sectors, specific sectors, because the competition is just too much difficult. The pressure from China and the pressure which is sometimes unfair with dumping, with state aid, with, I would say, unfair competition. We need protection, but protection is not enough. Protection is only a short-term solution. First of all, protection does not prevent China, or not only China, because we focus a lot on China, but the competition can come from other countries, and it's as long as it's fair, it's good. When it's unfair, it's a problem. But you can still open a factory in Europe, and you jump the tariff barriers. For instance, if you open a factory, you spoke about automotive, is BYD is opening in Hungary an automotive plant, or in Spain, there is no more tariffs. Tariffs, for example, or any kind of protection like quotas do not protect from the competition in third-party countries. So if European companies face Chinese companies in Indonesia, in Nigeria, in Brazil, there is no tariffs that apply, and the best will win. And we see that the export of China are booming in emerging economies, plus 20%. So we need a very strong innovation, competitiveness, simplification. It's a reshuffle of the whole business model of Europe that we need to think about. Europe is 7% of the global world population. It's 18% of GDP, but it's 50% of social spending. So if we don't re-engine, if we don't rethink the way we finance this social spending, will go to the wall. Most of it is pension, and our population is aging. So you mentioned immigration. And of course, if your population is aging, we are losing 2 million workers per year in Europe, 2 million less in the labor market. So if we want to be competitive, if we want to face the competition of China, we need absolutely to invest in innovation, which means automation, robotization, artificial intelligence, for sure, all tools, all leverage that allows us to be also loved by consumers. And I will finish maybe with that in the business model of Europe, because all the regulation in the last years, the Green Deal package that was brought by the European Parliament was ideological agenda. We are not against the green innovation. I mean, why not? There are some challenges, and it can be a booster, but it cannot be that technologies are chosen by the European Commission. It needs to be market-based approach. We need to let the innovation from the companies. You mentioned the EVs. We see the wall for the automotive industry that we created. Yesterday, there has been an announcement that we will give more flexibility, and we start, but it's too slow because we are not assuming a pro-growth, pro-business policies, which is what will save us, because in front of us in the race, we have people that are very aggressive in the good way or bad way, whatever, but they are. And if we are sticking to a model that is very calm, that think that the world will remain as it was, we will lose. So the business model of Europe needs to be, I think, remodeled. And this is a big challenge. We see it every day. So, yeah, the discussion, as I was saying in the other room, and to give you back the floor, sometimes it's a bit pity that the form is creating some disruption on the two sides of the Atlantic, because on the content, we are maybe not sharing everything, but there are lots of topics that are valid point to discuss. The imbalances of the trade, we could discuss this. But Europe, and I finished with that, not France, and even France, Europe benefited from the global trade. We have a surplus in goods, we have a surplus in services, and we are taking back money, financial flows from the investment overseas abroad. So we need also to keep that. It's difficult to find the balance between remaining open and closing.
Yeah, so if I can explain the view from the populist right, at least in the United States, trade is certainly beneficial to America, of course. However, trade is much less important to America than it is to the rest of the world, let's just be honest, in part because of the scale of our country, which is essentially a continent. And regarding trade, I think it's also important to put it in historical context. The United States, for many decades, really since World War II, willingly surrendered its advantages in trade. And it did so in a very purposeful way for larger geostrategic reasons, right? Because we wanted to build a strong Europe, we wanted to rebuild Japan, we wanted it to win the Cold War. So there were strategic reasons for us to acquiesce and to essentially surrender what should have rightfully been advantages for the United States in trade. But it's been 80 years since World War II. And nations such as the European ones have a standard of living at least as high as the standard of living enjoyed by Americans. And so now we are taking a much tougher stance on trade. And to me, trade tariffs make perfect sense as a reasonable toll, effectively, to enter the US market. In other words, we have built, through hard work and innovation, we've built the biggest, best consumer crown jewel of the world that every country and every company wants access to. It's smart for us to charge a reasonable fee for access to that market. You charge for the best seats in the theater or the sports stadium. We want to charge for entry to the American market, which I think is, again, is reasonable. And regarding Europe, again, I hope and believe that Europe can get back into close partnership with the United States. But I would encourage Europeans to read that NSS document, that National Security Strategy document. And to at least consider the points that the United States is making in that document, which largely flows from J.D. Vance, somebody who I'm very close with. And this is very much his worldview coming through. It's the president's as well, but this has really been driven in large part by some of the younger folks in the Trump administration. And for example, from our point of view, the situation in Ukraine, which has fallen disproportionately upon the United States, that's an asymmetry. Why are we the principal financier of the defense of Ukraine instead of the wealthy nations of Western Europe? Why can't the nations of Western Europe produce the kind of arms that need to be sent to Ukraine? Only the United States produces them, at least in the West, these kinds of arms. So we see that disequilibrium there, and we have asserted that, look, America first means we're going to prioritize our people, which, by the way, so far is working. I mentioned migration out of the United States. So we've had about 2.5 million people leave this year. There are over 2 million self-deportations from America, about 500,000 compelled arrests and deportations from the United States. At the same time, real wages have risen every single month this year under the Trump presidency. That's astounding. And we had the opposite during the Biden years. I think those two factors are intrinsically connected, right? That almost all those 2.5 billion people who have left were workers competing unlawfully in the American labor market against American citizens. So having them leave raises wages for American citizens. We can also note that we just got an employment report out yesterday in the States. There are now 2.6 million total jobs created in the United States in the last 12 months. All of them going to native-born Americans. Every single one of them. Foreigners actually lost net jobs. Foreigners who are legally in the United States lost jobs over the last year. So those are what we consider to be really, really big wins. And what I think also I would hope that I can convey to you is realize that, and this is true all over the world, but populism is on the rise, and we in the States, I can guarantee you, are not going back to an old school Republican Party of the George Bush era. That's not happening. It hardly even exists. It certainly doesn't exist at the voter level. So really it's a matter of, is it populism of the left Is it going to be the AOC, Zoran Mamdani version of the populist left, or is it going to be the populism of the right, of America First and MAGA? And while you may not love MAGA, I think you're going to appreciate it much more than the populist left, if they become assertive. But I'd like to ask you, Fabrice, what do you think in regards to Europe? How does Europe manage and negotiate the America First movement, and how does it? What are the tangible ramifications for Europe?
First, there is no Europe. There is 27 countries, and there is one European Union. And the difficulty in most of the debate is that people are comparing China, US, and Europe. But Europe is a very specific organization of sovereign nations that decided to build together many things, and together it's more and more integrated. But we still need, on some topic, to have unanimity. Can you imagine 27 countries? And we see that for the frozen asset of Russia for Ukraine. We see that for Mercosur trade agreement, where it's not unanimity, but it creates problem when a state like France is not in favor of that. We see that it's difficult to align the position because, just for instance, Germany for a long time had a very big exposure to Chinese market, export to China, 3% of GDP, while France is only 1.5% of GDP. In the relation to the US, it's the same. France is more investing because our companies invest. The industrial basis is less in France. We invest a lot. Germany is exporting from the country. So the exposure for tariff is not the same. And when you don't have the same exposure or the same interest, the alignment is more difficult. I think that, but this is more like maybe our own opinion, maybe the form for European, and it was what we were saying, is not something of our culture, the way all this topic has brought. And I would say that we would prefer that all this point to focus on content, because on content you may have a lot of valid points, and we may have lots of valid points. We would prefer a lot to have a kind of very deep discussion to try to align, because on what you say, for instance, on China, even to discuss about tariff barriers, sometimes we take regulation in Europe that we don't see as barrier, but they could maybe sometimes be non-tariff barrier as well. And when you speak about this of CS3D or CSRD, I don't want to go in acronyms or technical thing, but this kind of ESG regulation, by the way, that was pushed by some US for a long time. It's also is our life to have a simpler European Union. So we have also joint fights that we could brought, and I think that to emphasize what unites us is very important, because the world is very challenging. And to bounce back a little bit also and roll the discussion, there is something I don't understand, or I think it's a failure somehow of the US, because all these multilateral organizations were built after the Second World War, and this was the Pax Americana somehow. I'm not a geopolitician, but you understand what I mean. And it was also places where America has lots of influence through all the United Nations constellation. And we see that in the MAGA's movement, all these are associated with globalism and with wokist or whatever. And it's not working anyway. We pay a lot, World Bank, it's not efficient. And at the end of the day, these tools are being left to some other nations, I would say. Maybe they will die, but for now they are left. And the other nations are organizing themselves. So this retreat from global, is it a retreat from the global stage, or is it another way, or you want to still have this influence at global level in another way?
Yeah. I think it's a very good question and very valid. I think you need to realize that in the United States, multilateralism really failed America, because what it became, right, was in theory, it was going to be cooperation among allies, right, and a coalition of interested groups with sharing common vision and common philosophy. What it largely became was America essentially funding protectorates around the world, which was grossly unfair to the American people, and has put us into a position where we now have an untenable debt. So even if we wanted to continue a multilateralism architecture in the world, we simply can't afford it, okay? We're broke. The interest on the debt is now our single largest expense, even larger than defense. And we spend a lot on defense, right? As much as the rest of the world combined, roughly, on defense. So it's an unsustainable economic model. It's not just or fair on top of that. And I think also realize, I do a lot of polling in the United States. And again, this isn't peculiar to America because we see populism all over the world, but the American people are very angry right now. And regular working class Americans have seen their standard of living decline in recent years. And that's the first sustainable decline probably in all of American history, or certainly at least since the Great Depression, where we have seen a multi-year trend of working class people working harder to live less well, right? To see their quality of life, to see their standard of living decline, while a concentration of economic power at the very top of American society has been greatly exacerbated. Now, there's all kinds of forces causing that, a lot of them technological, but some of them are clearly political. And there is a revolt against that, a political revolt within the United States. But what I'm also, I guess, trying to convey is don't underestimate how angry the American people are. And they have every right to be angry. And when it comes to international order, they believe, quite rightly, that the United States has been abused, that our good intentions have been taken advantage of. And taken advantage of with the cooperation of a lot of Americans, by the way, okay? We're not pure victims here. No one was more responsible than Joe Biden for victimizing the people of the United States through an open border, right? He benefited from it. The NGOs that were directly tied to the left-wing political structures in the United States benefited from it. But the American people suffered greatly through depressed wages, through less safe streets, through national security issues, which are increasingly becoming common again. But we've taken action. We've taken action. So we've got a lot to fix, but we're starting to do it. And then when we look at Europe, we're not sure that Europe yet wants to fix these problems. You know, for example, I'm sure you all know, Paris just canceled its New Year's Eve celebration for the first time in 60 years. They typically have 1 million people on the Champs-Élysées. You're going to have no one, or at least trying to have no one, over security concerns. Because you've invited mass migration to this country, which simply has not worked well for France. Now, again, that's France's issue. It's not for us to dictate to France what to do, but realize that it does arouse a lot of skepticism on our side of the Atlantic, where we look and say, we've got similar issues that we are trying to tackle through a very aggressive action and aggressive policy. And we see Europe going in the other direction, you know, continuing to chase sort of DEI and ESG straw men, and continuing to insist that America pay for a war in Ukraine when it's essentially about defending Western Europe. You know, I guess I would ask you that just as a question. I mean, should we be paying for the defense of Ukraine?
I wanted to say that I was burning inside because I wanted to answer on Ukraine, on immigration, on Paris, on security, on all this, but I have my... And don't think that it's freedom of speech that is eaten on me, but it's because I have a mandate at MEDEF, at the French Business Employer Association, and I try to keep on the economic side.
So you can't be a firebrand like me?
I could, not here, there, in the other room. But because we are at OECD, and little time remains, just the takeaway, I would say, for us, we need to really quickly try to find new framework for global trade, because again, between closing everything or opening everything, there is a balance. And I think the model of having this 20 years negotiation on agreements that does not please anyone, because we say we have green rules, but the emerging economies, they say, you are very kind, these European guys, but we want also to export what we have. So your rules is your rules, but we want to export soja, we want to export beef, we want to export that. Otherwise, why we will sign an agreement with you? So we need to have a connection. We had too many compliance of these rules that disconnected from the rest of the world. And this 20 years negotiation, where the paper after 20 years looks really awkward and old, is not anymore possible. So maybe to focus on thematic agreements. UK did not sign with Global Britain a lot of agreements, but they signed, for example, one with Switzerland on financial data. Now we try to move on with India without maybe farmers and agriculture. So to try to rethink how we can engage in a global trade and be much quicker when there are unfair practices to block the flows, safeguard measures. We have anti-dumping for 2 years. Anti-dumping files are for 2 years. Safeguard measures should be automatic when you are a market that is dysfunctioning, too close to protect. And this is for everyone to think about it and to act, because now we see that if we don't act, all these establishment parties are completely waved out, because the people want something. And what you describe about the US, time is running out now. We see it in Europe as well. So the challenges are the same, and we should work together to find solutions that don't divide us, but that makes the world stronger, because in the world there are also some ideology that are not very, that are much more different than the difference that we have today. So let's work together. That's my message. Thank you.
Thank you.